Hello and welcome to today's class. We're going to continue from where we left yesterday. Quadratic expressions basically is what we've been looking at of late. And we said that these are equations that are in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. All right. So they're basically equations in the form ax squared plus bx. All right, let's see. And we said that A, B, and C have to be coefficients. I mean, they have to be coefficients. They have to be constants, and that A must not be equal to 0. Okay, and that A must not be equal to 0. The situation in which A equals to 0, then when A is equal to 0, then it changes from being a quadratic equation and it becomes a linear expression. Sorry, it changes from being a quadratic expression to a linear expression. And so in the previous class, we looked at how to expand linear expressions as a way of deriving quadratic expressions, right? And so in this particular class, we're going to do quite the opposite of what we did in that previous class. And so we are going to take a quadratic expression and factorize it. All right, we're going to take a quadratic expression and attempt to factorize it. And so we have an example here that is x squared plus 6x plus 5. And we are supposed to factorize this particular quadratic expression. Now, for you to factorize a quadratic expression, there are two terms you're supposed to keep in mind, and that is product and sum. All right, you're supposed to keep those two terms in mind for you to factorize a quadratic expression. So when you talk of product, we always talk of the product of A and C. So remember that a quadratic expression is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So when we talk of product, we're talking of the coefficient of x squared, which is a, times c. All right. So in this particular case, when we look at this quadratic expression, our AC, of course, right, our AC will be 1 times 5, because this is our A, which has a coefficient of 1. Our A here has a coefficient of 1, and our C has a coefficient of 5. So when you talk of the product in this particular expression, which would be AC, we'll be talking of 1 times 5. All right. So I'll just have it there as 5. Okay. All right. This is an easy introduction into how to factorize quadratic expressions. So just walk with me and I'll show you how it's done. Then another thing you should always keep in mind after you've mastered the art of finding the product is the sum, the concept of sum. Sum should always be looked at. Looked at using B. All right. So we're having ax squared plus bx plus c. So sum, when you're looking at sum, or as a way of factorizing a quadratic expression, always do it thinking of b. All right. B is the coefficient of x, which in this particular case happens to be 6. All right. So in this particular case, we'll be thinking of 6. Now that we have product and sum of this particular quadratic expression, the question we ask ourselves is, what two numbers do we know of? Okay, what two numbers do we know of that when they are multiplied together, all right, will give us 5? What two numbers do we know of that when they are multiplied together will give us 5, and when we add them will give us 6? Note, after you've determined what your product is, which should be found by A, taking A times C, and you've determined what your sum is in a quadratic expression, you ask yourself the question, what two numbers do you know of? Okay, what two numbers do you know of that when we multiply them together will give us 5? All right, and when we add them together will give us 6. That's okay. Now I want you to think of all the factors of 5, all the factors of 5. Now when you take 5 times 1, 5 times 1 will give you 5. So those are two numbers that when you multiply together already will give you 5. All right, that is 5 and 1. When you multiply these two numbers, 5 times 1 will give you 5, and when you add them, it will give you 6. So basically we have the number that we already are looking for. All right, so we already have the number that we're already looking for. And so for us to then go ahead and factorize this particular expression, we are going to use 5 and 1. And how did we find 5 and 1? 5 and 1 by looking at the product of the expression and its sum. Now let's go ahead and factorize this. We're using 5 and 1. Now, for us to factorize this expression, quadratic expression, using 5 and 1, we are going to rewrite it using 5 and 1. So basically, we're going to maintain our x squared and our x squared. Basically, going to maintain our x squared, and then when we are rewriting for b in bx, yeah, when you're writing for bx, we're going to rewrite it using 5 and 1. So we know that 5 plus 1 will give us 6. So we're going to write b such that when you add 5 and 1, we get 6x. So that's basically going to be x plus 5x. All right, and we have used these two numbers here. All right, so you take x plus 5x, get 6, which was actually, all right, the number in the number representing b in the coefficient of x here, plus 5. All right, then we are then going to pair them together and factorize. So we're going to pair these two together like that, and these two together like this. Okay, kind of try and don't consider the positive sign in between. All right, don't consider the positive sign in between. All right, so after pairing these two terms together, we are going to factorize for each pair. So we are going to look at the first pair, and we note that when you look at the first pair, x is a common factor, is the GCD there. So we're going to take x out, and so for us to find the terms that are supposed to be within the bracket, it's going to be x squared divided by x, which will give us x, plus x divided by x, which will give us 1. That's okay. Then looking at the second pair, we're going to look at, we have 5x and what? And 5. So the GCD, the greatest common divisor between these two terms, happens to be 5. So we're going to factorize that out. And so we're going to have plus 5 into, so 5x divided by 5 will give us x, plus 5 divided by 5 will give us 1. All right, so if you've done our class on factorization by grouping, then you will remember we said that whenever we have a situation where the terms in the bracket are identical to each other, we will pick one of them and pick the two of the other terms that are outside the bracket. So basically, to factorize this, we're basically going to have x, which is outside the first bracket, plus 5, which you can see is outside here, into x plus 1. And that will be the factorized version of this particular expression, that is x squared plus 6x plus 1. So note that the two most important things is that you know what the product is and what the sum is, and then you use the two numbers that you get from using sum product concept to factorize the rest of the expression. Let us look at another example, then maybe it helps you understand this concept far much better. Awesome. Okay, so we are looking at example 2 here, and example 2 is not so much different from what we did in example 1, just that now we are having a situation where our a is not 1. Okay, our a, when you look at the format for writing, when you look at the format of a quadratic expression in this particular case, our a won't be 1. So that is the only thing that was changed here. And so I want us to see if you're given a situation where a is necessarily not 1, if you're able to then go ahead and still factorize the quadratic expression. So remember that generally a quadratic expression should take the form ax squared plus bx plus c. All right, that is the general formula for writing or representation of a quadratic expression. And so whenever you're trying to factorize a quadratic expression, I said that you're supposed to have two terms in mind. And so the two terms I said that you're supposed to keep in mind are product. Okay, and so I told you that product should always be given by multiplying a and c. And when you look at the format of a quadratic expression, ax squared plus bx plus c, then we know that ac should be the coefficient of x squared and our constant. All right, so in this particular case, our a will be 6 and our c will be 6. Yeah, so we are having 6 times 6. So in this particular case, our product will be 6 times 6, which will give us 36. Awesome. Now, that is the first term that you're always supposed to keep in mind when you are factorizing. Then the second term that you should always keep in mind is always the sum, okay? Is always the sum. And when you're talking of the sum, we want to look at the value of b, all right? The value of b, remember when we were talking about the form, the format of a quadratic expression, basically we said that it's usually in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So we are talking of the coefficient of x, okay? So when you're looking at the sum, you should always be thinking of the coefficient of x, which in this particular case happens to be what? Negative 13. Okay, so we're going to have negative 13 there. Now that we have our product and we have our sum, note, you are then supposed to ask yourself a question. What two numbers do you know of? Okay, what two numbers do you know of that when we multiply them together will give us 36? Okay, two numbers that when we multiply together will give us 36, and when we add them together will give us negative 13. Okay, so basically you want to start going through, your multiplication table and figure out these two numbers. So in this particular case, the number that I can quickly think of is 9 times negative 9 times negative 4. All right. When you take negative 9 times negative 4, you will get, first of all, these are two negatives, we'll get a positive number. Basically, that is like having 9 times 4, and that will give you 36. Okay. However, when you add negative 9 and negative 4, you get negative what? Negative 13. So these are the two numbers, okay? These are the two numbers that you can multiply together to give you our product, which happens to be 36, and add together as well to give you what? Negative 13. So we are going to then write our quadratic expression using the two numbers, that is negative 9 and negative 4. So in place of b, we will have negative 9x and negative 4x. So basically that's going to give us 6x squared minus. So when we are writing b, we will write it in terms of these two numbers. So that's going to be negative 9x minus 4x. So when you take negative 9x minus 4x, basically you're supposed to get negative 13x. So we're just rewriting this particular quadratic expression using these two numbers, that is negative 9 and negative 4 plus 6. Okay, now that we have that in place, we then think of these quadratic expression in pairs and factorize common factors out. Okay, all right, so we are going to take these two and factorize the common factor in that particular scenario. So when you look at 6x squared minus 9x, the common factors that we have there is actually 3 and what? 3 and x. So basically 3x. The GCD of those two numbers is 3. Why? First of all, when you're thinking of common factor, I said that you are supposed to take, if there are variables on both of the terms, take the one with the lowest power. So the one with the lowest power here happens to be x. That's why we have x out here, right? Then when you think of the coefficient, think of 6 and 9. 6 and 9 as a GCD. What is the GCD of 6 and 9? The GCD of 6 and 9 apparently happens to be 3. All right. So basically, that means that our common factor will be 3 and x. The product of 3 and x, that is 3x. Okay. So now we have what we have our common factor there. So we're going to introduce our bracket. Remember, factorization simply means introduction of brackets. All right. So for us to find the term that we're going to have after the bracket, we're going to have to take 6x squared. Okay, 6x squared divided by 3x. All right, so 6x squared divided by 3x. So the coefficients will divide each other. So that will be 6 divided by 3, giving us 2. Okay, 6 divided by 3, giving us 2. And then x squared divided by x, giving us x. Okay, x squared divided by x, giving us x. Basically, that is the same as having x. We basically getting the difference of the powers. Okay, so 2 minus 1. Okay, this x is raised to the power of 2. This is raised to the power of 1. So it's basically 2 minus 1. So that is 2x. So that is what we're going to have for the first term. Then for the second term, minus, we're going to have 9x divided by 3x. Okay, 9x divided by 3x. So the coefficients, okay, so we have 9 divided by 3, and divided by 3 is going to be 3, and then x divided by x, which is the same as 1 minus 1. Basically, x divided by x will cancel each other, so we won't have x no more. Any number raised to 0 equals to 1. So we, when you take the power of x here is 1, okay, and 1 here as well. So it's 1 minus 1. And so whenever you raise any number to 0, you get 1. And so basically that will do away with the variables. And so we're just going to have 3 there. Okay, which is, 3 times 1, which is 3. Okay. Anyways, now let us go on to the second pair. All right, to the second pair, we are having negative 4x plus 6. Okay, we're having negative 4x plus 6, and we want to write it using, we want to factorize it. Basically we want to factorize it. And so the first thing we look at is what are the common factors indeed between these two terms, that is negative 4x and 6. And you will note that x is in negative 4 and it's not here, so x basically is not going to be a common factor there. All right, and so we are going to look at the coefficients then. So we have negative 4 and we have 6. What do you know as the GCD of negative 4 and 6? So that will be negative what? And it will be negative 2. All right, so negative 2 will be the GCD of negative 4 and 6. All right, so when you take negative 4x divided by negative 2, negative 4x divided by negative 2, that is basically like having negative 4 divided by negative 2. So you're going to have that to be 2x. Okay, so that when you multiply these two together, it gives you, when you multiply negative 4, negative 2 times 2, x gives you 4x. Basically that is it. So that is negative 4x divided by negative 2 will give you 2x, and then 6 divided by negative 2. Okay, 6 divided by negative 2 will give you negative 3. Okay, that is a positive number divided by a negative number. That's always going to give you a negative. A positive number divided by a negative number is always going to give you a negative. So it is 6 divided by 2 giving you negative 3 in that particular case. Now note that the numbers that are in the brackets, are actually identical. Okay, the terms in the bracket are identical. All right, so we are going to do factorization by doing what? By grouping. So factorization by grouping simply means that we're going to take 3x, all the numbers that are outside the bracket, minus 2, we group them together. Then the ones that are within the bracket, we just pick one, that is 2x minus 3. Yeah, so this is going to be the factorized version of this quadratic expression, and so we are going to leave our answer at that. I'll attempt the last example, and then we will call it a day. Awesome. So we're looking at the last example in this particular case. All the examples have been unique. All right, so the first one we had a being equal to 1. Second one we had a being to a number that is greater than 1. Actually, that was 6. And so the last one, we are looking at a situation where we are having a quadratic expression. All right, we're having a quadratic expression with common factor in its terms. So I want you to look at this particular quadratic expression. And before I do that, let me just give you the general formula for quadratic expression. It should always be ax squared plus bx plus c, and a, b, and c should be constants or coefficients, and we always say that a must never be equal to 0. The moment a is 0, then it is no longer a quadratic expression. It is then considered a linear expression. So anyway, let us look at this particular expression here because it's a special one, all right? So I want you to note that even before we can factorize it, all right, we are having 2 as a common factor here, which is also a common factor in this term, which is also a common factor in this term. So 2 is a common factor here, a common factor with negative 14, and also a common factor with 20, A, B, and C. So before we can even think of factorizing this, we're going to have to first of all factorize that 2 out. All right, so we are going to pull the 2 out. All right, okay, so we're going to have 2 into. So 2x squared divided by 2 will give us x squared minus that's going to be negative 14x divided by 2 will give us negative 7x plus negative, not negative, but positive 20, all right, divided by 2 will give us 10. All right, so we've already factored out the common factor that was in the all expression. All right, so that we have it in a simpler format that we can then go ahead and basically try and factorize. So now that we have this expression in this form, we are going to mainly focus on what we have in the bracket. So this is what we are going to attempt to factorize, and that is going to be x squared minus 7x plus 10. All right, so as we factorize, I told you that we are always supposed to think of 2 terms. Okay, we are supposed to think of product, which is usually supposed to be the product of a and c. In this particular case, our a is 1 and our c is 10. So a times c in that case will be equal to 10. And then the second term you should always be thinking of is usually sum, and sum is usually supposed to be equal to the sum of b. All right, basically in this particular case our b is negative 7. Okay, so now we know our sum and we know our product. Okay, so our product is 10 and our sum is negative 7. So we are supposed to think of 2 numbers. Okay, we're supposed to think of 2 numbers that when we multiply them will give us 10, and when we add them will give us negative 7. Okay, we multiply them will give us 10 and we add them will give us negative 7. Quickly thinking, that will be the numbers negative 5 and negative 2. All right, so when you take negative 5 times negative 2, you are going to get 10. Negative 5 times negative 2 will give you 10. And when you add both of them, that is negative 5 plus negative 2 will give you negative 7. And so we are going to rewrite the equation within the bracket using negative 5 and negative 2. Okay, so basically that is going to then be 2 into x squared minus, so negative 5 and negative 2 should be used to write the value of b, all right, which happens to be negative 7 here. So that's going to be x squared minus 5x, okay, minus 2x. So that when you take negative 5x plus negative 2x, you get negative 7x. Yeah, so we are just rewriting it in that particular format. We haven't changed its value, we just rewritten it in that particular format. Plus 10. All right, so we are focused mainly on what we have in our curly bracket, right? That is what we have mainly focused on. And so now that we have it in this format, we are going to think of them in pairs and find the common factor and use that to factorize this expression. So basically this is going to be 2 into, so x squared and 5x, x squared and negative 5x. So the common factor here is going to be x. So it's going to be x. We take the one with the lowest power, that's going to be x. So it's going to be x into what? X into x squared divided by x will give us x. That's okay. X squared divided by x will give us x. And negative 5x divided by x will give us negative 5. All right, so we are done with the first pair. Then we think of the second pair, and that's going to be negative 2x plus 10. All right, negative 2x plus 10. So when you look at these two, all right, the GCD, their common divisor, will be negative 2. All right, will be negative 2. So when you take negative 2x divided by negative 2, then we are going to have x. All right, and then 10 divided by negative 2, a positive divided by a negative number will be negative 5. So that will be 10 divided by negative 2, giving us negative 5. All right, so note, the numbers we are having in the brackets, the terms we are having in the brackets are identical. So we can do factorization by grouping. In that particular case, then, we are going to be left with x minus 2 into x minus 5. And so the most simpler version of this factorized equation will just basically be, we can then write it as 2 into x minus 2 into x minus 5. And so that will be it for this particular problem. And if you have any questions, if you have any inquiry, you can always email me. You'll find the link to my email in the description section. And see you in the next one. Have a good one.